And one more question on the Challenge Tour before we move on. It's actually our question of the week. Matthew Edgar tweeted over the weekend, Pro Tours moved to a 1 p.m. start time to give players better preparation time. Meanwhile, the Challenge Tour starts at 10 a.m. with a round of 512 players. Challenge Tour no way replicates the Pro Tour and needs a major revamp. So our question of the week, though, is if you were in charge, would you make changes? And if so, what would you do?
Yeah, and first of all, I'll avoid making the jokes from the first part of the question. If you're in charge, you can make them yourselves at home. But if our listeners were in charge, 76% of them would make changes based on our poll at the moment. So do go on Twitter and get in touch with us. Let us know your thoughts. I'll just go through some of our listener responses so far. Gareth Hughes has said seedings plus a cap of a 1-2-8 based on making their way into round 2 of Q School. That was his suggestion. One of our long-time listeners of the show, John Thompson, said a very good point that's the entries for last year. He posted up an image of the entries across the first few weekends, and a lot more entries for the first weekend compared to the next few weekends. He said it's a problem that's isolated to the opening weekend when you have a lot of people staying on after Q School or just prioritising with the most important events of the year, i.e. getting onto the Pro Tour through them events. Cut the first weekend to 4 events over the same time frame, and it's probably fine. Not sure whether it'd be best to play 1 to 3 on the Friday/Saturday, playing the first 2 or 3 rounds of event 2 on the Friday, then concluding Saturday, or having the Friday to play all 4 down to the last 1-2-8. And as he said, last year we had around 260 to 280 in that first weekend, and each weekend after that we do see the numbers drop during the rest of the season. And it was a case of the weekend we had just over 300 players in Milton Keynes. And I think Johnny makes a good point there, because you could perhaps play the first weekend with just the 4 events, cut it back from 5 to 4 and split them a little bit more evenly over those 3 days. I think it would take a bit of tinkering, but I think it is something that is worth looking into, and maybe it is worth the PDC or the PDPA getting feedback from the players themselves if they're not already, because they're the ones that are putting the money in. They pay their entry fees for these events. They are committing to the Challenge Tour, and do they like it as it is, or would they prefer one event as opposed to 2 most days and maybe have more prize money in one event? I've not played on the Challenge Tour, but they appear to be long days for the players, especially if you have a long run in that second event, because it's the time preparing before the first event in the morning, as you say there, 10:30 start, 10 o'clock start. And then if you do get late into the second tournament, it is a late finish. So you're not going to be able to perform at your best. And sometimes it can be survival of the fittest rather than the best players necessarily coming through. And Matthew Edgar's point there, it's not mirroring the Pro Tour, and I don't think it is it? You've got 2 events a day, but there are rewards on the table here. You've got the 2-year tour cards, you've got the Grand Slam spot, you've got the World Championship spots. There's a lot on the line here for the players, so definitely needs to be looked at, I think. And if you play on the Challenge Tour, if you are listening to this, do let us know your thoughts. We'll read them out on the show. We'll discuss your ideas as well. You can drop us a DM on Twitter or email us weeklydartscast@gmail.com. Let us know your thoughts, because it appears that it's something that people are talking about, and maybe there should be a change for the Challenge Tour.
Yeah, I thought about this a bit over the last couple days, and obviously thought about it more once we put it on the spreadsheet to discuss. And I understand the criticism, and maybe there is some change that could work. But the other thing is, this is supposed to be an opportunity for players to continue to get in the PDC umbrella matches if they've decided to pay that money and go to Q School. And that does bring in a decent bit of money for the PDC at, £400 per entry for Q School. If nearly 1,000 people are doing it, that is quite a bit of money that's brought in. And if all they get is Q School, not as many people are going to be doing it. There are people who just went and did 1 day of Q School because they wanted to play the Challenge Tour. And there are players who know they're not ready to have a tour card and wouldn't be doing Q School if they didn't have the Challenge Tour at the back end. And if you make this mimic in some way the Pro Tour, it might drive some people to not go and give it a chance, because how do they know if they're going to make whatever that 128 players in that second tier that would make this mimic it? If it is limited to 128, how do they know they're going to get there? But there could be some type of middle ground that would move us in that direction towards this being a preparatory tour for that next best group of players in the world. And that's, maybe have 3 weekends where anyone who went to Q school is allowed to go. Have 12 events or 15 events across those 3 weekends. But then after that, only allow those who are on the top 128 to continue with the Challenge Tour for the second half of the year and have another 12 events. Maybe those 12 events have a little bit more money on offer, and have those events be run like Players Championship events, so that it really does mimic the obviously at an overall lower level, though James Hurl might disagree with that with the level he played at. But overall, it would probably be a lower level, but still 128 players playing each of those events, 2 or 3 a weekend in that second half of the year, with the carrot of those 2 World Championship spots, spot in the Grand Slam, and spot for those who don't end up with the tour card in the UK Open the following year on the line, and have that be as like a not tour card holders, but these Challenge Tour members who because of their performances in that first half get to play the second half, and that might better prepare them. But that said, the Challenge Tour players have overall, at least the ones who have done well in the Challenge Tour, they've made the transition pretty seamlessly. I mean, Scott Williams last year was playing the Challenge Tour and dominating, well, maybe not dominating, but doing pretty darn well when he was playing the Pro Tour events. He won one of them, and he wasn't the first person ever to do that. The cream of the Challenge Tour seemed to be able to transition smoothly. And yes, this is a different setup. It doesn't seem to be hampering. And the big negative is that they are really, really long days when they don't have to be. But it seems to work, and it does to some extent cut down on costs because you get 5 events in 3 days. That's 2 fewer days to get those fewer events. And if you had 1 a day, which means that's 2 fewer nights that people have to pay for hotel rooms. Or if you had to split that over 2 weekends, that's possibly 3 fewer days that people have to pay for hotel rooms, and 2 fewer train rides, or 2 fewer car rides, or 2 fewer flights for people coming from overseas, especially for players coming from the Americas to compete in these events, which if you do it more like Players Championship events, would make it more expensive for events that have a lot less money on the line than Players Championships do. And no one is going to say that there should be 10,000 or 12,000 pounds rather for the winner of these events. Maybe it can go up from 2,000 to 3,000 in the near future, maybe even 4,000. That would be, showing progress on this. But that's a lot to ask people to pay to fly internationally more often than they currently have to. It isn't ideal, but it seems to work the best. Some compromise where there is that second half of the season down to 128 could be good, and it gives some incentive for the players in that first half of the year to make sure they're getting the results, and then they can play a more Players Championship-like atmosphere the second half. That could be a good compromise. But overall, I don't think I would do anything drastic, at least in the first half of the year, because this does work, even if it isn't ideal.